Yeah, if someone wants to turn off the lights so we can see it better, then do that. Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So what we'll be discussing over the next few days is we'll be having an intensive Aqidah workshop. And Aqidah, as we might all know, is the study of theology, or the study of basically things related to what we believe and why we believe so. Now, so this isn't just to give all of us an idea of what we're getting into, this isn't going to be necessarily a formal Aqidah course where we cover a text in Aqidah and then we go systematically from one concept to another. But rather what I decided to do is that we're going to take different topics in Aqidah that are sort of commonly misunderstood or people have a lot of questions about, and then we'll discuss those things. So it won't necessarily follow a formal structure with a logical progression from one day's topic to the next, but inshallah all of them will be pertinent topics that hopefully will provide some clarity on some perhaps commonly misunderstood issues. So just to give you an idea of some of the things that we'll be discussing, today our topic of discussion today will be the existence of Allah Ta'ala, which we'll get into very shortly. Then some other topics that we'll have inshallah is we'll discuss a little bit of the development of Islamic theology. How did Islamic theology come about? Why is the study of Aqidah necessary? What are the schools in Aqidah? How did it develop? So a little bit of the theological history. That'll be another day, inshallah. One day we'll discuss the concept of bid'ah. So although it's not necessarily a formal discussion that you see in Aqidah books, but it's something that is commonly misunderstood. So one day we'll discuss the concept of bid'ah, what constitutes a bid'ah. One day we'll discuss, 1 or 2 days we'll devote to what is Sunni theology, what is Shia theology, what are the differences between Sunnis and Shias. So we'll discuss a little bit about that as well. One day we'll discuss the legal authority of hadith as well, inshallah, because although again it's not a formal discussion that arises in Aqidah books, but it's something that is very important for us to believe. We need to believe in the legality of hadith, we need to believe in the authority of hadith. So that's something that inshallah we'll discuss as well. So with that said, let's get right into it, and then, so that's just sort of a prelude into what we'll be going through inshallah over the next few days. So with that said, let's get right into it inshallah. So what we're discussing today is the existence of Allah Ta'ala. And then I chose this topic for today for obvious reasons, because this is the cornerstone of all of our belief. If we don't have this, na'udhu if someone doesn't have this, then everything else is based on this. They won't have anything else. Right? So this is the cornerstone of our belief. And now this isn't something necessarily that the Quran went into extensive detail discussing this in particular, nor is it something that you see extensively in many books, many historical books of Aqidah. Why? Because this was kind of like a given. So if we look at the Quran, mostly the Quran discusses why there are not multiple gods. The Quran discusses why idolatry is not correct, logically speaking. The Quran poses arguments for why there can't be many gods. The Quran talks about how we should look in the universe around us, the world around us, and recognize the one God. But the Quran doesn't necessarily, time and again, maybe in 1 or 2 places, but not on a consistent basis, the Quran doesn't necessarily address the topic of why it's necessary that a creator exists. Why? Because this is relatively a new phenomenon, relatively speaking. For the most part, humanity has largely believed in some concept of a divine being, be it one or be it many or be it something like that, but humanity has largely believed in a divine creator, right? Some sort of divine being. Now this concept of not believing in any creator whatsoever, this is a relatively new concept. Okay. So now, and this is something that we have probably seen around us. Unfortunately, many of us might know people who unfortunately have left the fold of Islam or having serious doubts about whether their creator exists or not, whether Allah Ta'ala exists or not. So this is why this is something very important for us to discuss. Because if we're not having doubts, then, well, that's great. We ask Allah Ta'ala keep our iman firm, but we might know other people who are having doubts. And if we don't currently know other people who are having doubts, then we might eventually at some point encounter somebody who's having doubts. So it's very important for us to furnish ourselves with this knowledge. And on top of that, for many of us, our belief has largely been that we believe in Islam, but if somebody asks us, so why do you believe in it? Then many of us will be like, well, we believe in it because it's true. And if somebody says, well, why is it true? They say, well, because I believe in it. It's sort of like a circular argument, which is okay at some level. But however, the problem with that is that when a challenge to our belief arises, if somebody poses some sort of objection, saying that you, na'udhu billah, shouldn't believe in a creator because of this, then if we just believe because we believe, then it would be problematic. We would find ourselves to be cornered. So that's why it's important to go through, at some point, it's important to go through a discussion of the existence of Allah Ta'ala and why we believe in the existence of Allah. So of course we only have about, 45 minutes or something like that. So this discussion will not be comprehensive. But what this is meant to do is just give us somewhat of a glimpse into some of the arguments for the existence of Allah Ta'ala and why that is the most rational conclusion. So with that, we'll begin. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So let's introduce the discussion. The first thing is that our discussion today will not, at least from the outset, it won't be on the basis of scripture. It won't be on the basis of the Quran. Eventually we'll get into that, but not initially. The reason is, when we have any discussion with anyone, it needs to be on the basis of what's called in Arabic musallamat, principles that both of us agree on. Why? Because if we both have some common ground, we both agree on something, then we can build something on that discussion. But if a Christian comes to me and says, you need to believe in Jesus, and I say, why? Like, believe in Jesus and whatever they believe about it. I say, why? They say, well, the Bible says so, so that's why you have to do so. Do you think that argument will convince me? No, it won't convince me. Why? Because in order to have any productive discussion, we need to discuss on the basis of things that are commonly agreed on principles. So do I agree that the Bible is, an untainted, unadulterated, untampered with book from Allah Ta'ala? No. So do you think that I would accept that as a basis for my belief? A Christian might, but I don't. So if a Christian wants to convince me of something, they can't start with the basis of the Bible. They need to start with something that I agree on, right? So similarly, if we are giving da'wah to somebody, we say that you need to believe in Allah because the Quran says so. Well, that's true, the Quran does say so. But do you think that that will, just saying that much, do you think that that will convince somebody? It won't convince anyone. Why? For the most part, most people, it won't convince them because they don't accept the Quran as a valid source of belief. So then how can they base any belief on that if they don't accept that as a source of legislation in the first place? So with that said, we need any discussion that we have needs to be on the basis of musallamat, things that we mutually agree on. And once we have that common ground, then on the basis of that, we can have some productive discussion. We can have additional postulates and build things on that. But if we don't have that common ground in the beginning, then we won't be able to base anything off of that. Does that make sense? Okay, so now what would be the common ground between us and somebody who doesn't believe in any creator? Or let's just say a normal person who's not a Muslim. What would be the common ground? Probably not Quran and Hadith. That's not going to be common ground. But what will be common ground? Maybe mushahadat, things that we observe in nature, right? So that's something that's a common ground because we might observe something and somebody else might observe something. So stuff that's empirical, stuff that we can observe in nature, stuff that we can test. So that's something that no one can really deny. So that's one common thing between us. Another thing is between us and a regular person would be not necessarily things that are just observed in nature, mushahadat, not necessarily things that are empirically tested, but in addition to that, awlawiyat, intuitive truths, truths that are self-evident. So these two things will form the basis, primarily the basis of our epistemology, what we use as a source of knowledge. So what are the two things? Self-evident truths, that's number one. Number two is going to be things that we observe. Okay, so we'll discuss what both of those things are very shortly. So now what are things that we observe, mushahadat, that's pretty much self-explanatory. What are self-evident truths? A self-evident truth, as we'll discuss shortly, we have, the next slide is dedicated to that. We'll discuss this and we'll go back to the previous slide. Okay, a self-evident truth is something that, in short, something that anybody can see and anybody will hear and be like, yeah, that makes sense, I believe in that, that's true. Okay, so a self-evident truth must be something that's number one. Do I have a pointer here? Yeah. Okay, so self-evident truth must be something that's universal. It's not something that's specific to any particular culture. So only people from Latvia know that thing. So that thing wouldn't be a self-evident truth if it's only people from Latvia, for example. It's a country in Europe. And the next thing, it should be untaught. It shouldn't require any transfer of knowledge. So if something is just naturally, intuitively known, that's also self-evident. Again, it should be natural, it should be intuitive. I basically just said those two things. Okay, so now these are things that are self-evident. So for example, let me say that, an example that Hamza Zortzis gives. If somebody sits you down, they say, I need to take you out for lunch. They take you out for lunch and then they start explaining to you a complex theory. They say that, you know what, I believe that the past doesn't exist. Everything that we thought we experienced in our lives, it's just an illusion in our minds. The past really doesn't exist. We're only existing in the moment. So you hear that, you're like, whoa, that's kind of confusing. It doesn't seem to make sense. And then you say, well, okay, let's try to figure this out. So now you spend an hour discussing with him, going back and forth. You say why you think the past exists. He says why he thinks the past doesn't exist. You're just going back and forth. Now, would that lead to anything? Maybe. Maybe you might be able to convince him. But you know what would be an even better approach than that? You simply ask him. You say that, well, what's your evidence for the past not existing? So then you can say that. Then the onus of the proof would be on him. So now this is the second point that we need to understand right now, that when you have a self-evident truth, by its very nature, it's self-evident, which means that it doesn't require proof. Okay, so a self-evident truth doesn't require proof. So now let's try to understand, or let's try to determine, which position do you think is self-evident? That the past exists or that the past doesn't exist? That the past exists. If somebody believes that the past doesn't exist, then do you think that's a universal concept? That people across cultures, everyone just understands it? And no. Do you think it's untaught? Do you think a child will just naturally understand that the past doesn't exist, or will it require somebody to sit you down and indoctrinate you with that ideology? It'll require some transfer of information. It's not something that's just untaught. Is it intuitive? Is it the easiest explanation? No, it's not, right? So we can understand, which one do you think is self-evident? That the past exists or that the past doesn't exist? That the past exists, right? So what we understand from that is that a self-evident truth doesn't require any proof. Does that make sense? That's a very important, crucial point that we should understand. So back to what we are discussing. So we said that any discussion needs to be on the basis of musallamat, things that are mutually agreed upon. Does everyone understand that? Yes. The next thing is that, well, what are musallamat with just a normal person who maybe doesn't have any belief? Well, we can say that observation, observed evidence, empirical evidence, that's number one. Number two would be things that are self-evident. Okay, so that's also something that any normal, reasonable, rational person would also agree on. Do we understand those two things? Okay, so those are two things. Now with that said, let's keep that in our minds, and then with those two premises, we can now progress forward and we can sort of develop some arguments. But we need to have those two things as a basis. Does everyone understand? Good. So now what we'll be talking about right now is what's called the evidentalist approach of discussing the existence of a creator. So you look for evidence for the existence of God, and then from the evidence that you have, from the starting point, which is a self-evident truth, or which is something that's observed in nature, then from there you make rational or you make deductive arguments. Okay, so over here, this is something that's pretty much common to any religion that believes in a God. So a Christian will also do the same thing, a Jew will also do the same thing that a Muslim is doing. Because at some level, do all of these groups believe in a God? They do, right? So then from this basis, we can use logical arguments to move forward. Okay, does everyone understand this? Okay, good. Now, a logical argument, the term for that is called a syllogism. As you can see over here, a syllogism is a logically flowing argument. So you have basically it just logically flows and it leads you to a conclusion. So I can say all men are mortal. Does everyone understand? So that's premise number one, all men are mortal. Number two, Thomas Jefferson was a man. Okay, we have our two premises. Now we can put both of those two together and we can come to a conclusion. Now without looking, can anybody tell me what the conclusion from those two premises might be? Well, all men are mortal. Number two, Thomas Jefferson was a man. So the conclusion would logically be what? Okay, let me just hear one person. Thomas Jefferson was mortal, right? That's our conclusion, and that's something that logically flows. So what is a syllogism? Even if you don't remember the term, it's okay, as long as we understand the concept. It's a logically flowing argument, so this is an example of a logically flowing argument. Now keep in mind, just because we have a logically flowing argument, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the premises that we're starting with are correct. You can have a logically flowing argument with incorrect premises as well. Okay, so let me show you this. So if I say tigers like to bounce on their tails, okay, that's premise number one. Is that correct or incorrect? Has anybody ever seen a tiger outside of cartoons that like to bounce on their tails? No. Okay, well that's an incorrect premise. And I say Fluffy is a tiger, so that means the logical conclusion is that, what, you tell me without looking. Fluffy must also bounce on its tail. Okay, so is this a logically flowing argument? It is a logically flowing argument. Why? Because the conclusion logically follows from the premises. It is a logically flowing argument. However, our information that we started with, the premises that we started with, are incorrect. Do we understand? So just because something logically flows doesn't necessarily mean that the premises are correct. Do we understand that? Does everyone understand? It's getting a bit complicated, but hopefully it's not too much. Okay, so now when will something be a definitive proof? When, number one, the premises are correct, and number two, it logically flows. Okay, if you have something with incorrect premises, even if it logically flows, will it constitute evidence for anything? No. So in order for something to be a definitive proof for me and you to accept, for me and you to believe in, there needs to be two things. What are those two things? Must logically flow, and the premises must be correct. Do we all understand that? Okay, good. Now, okay, with that, let's talk about a syllogism, a logically flowing argument that actually has some sort of implication for us. This is what's called the Kalam cosmological argument. So whatever began to exist has a cause. That's our premise number one. Anything that began to exist, it must have a cause. Do we all understand that? Does anybody disagree with that? Okay, if we walk around and we go to France and then we see the Eiffel Tower, we say, wow, that looks like something that's pretty complex. I wonder who designed it. And then we have our tour guide who's telling us that, no, actually no one designed it. What happened was, it just appeared. It was just not there one day, and then one day we woke up and then it was just there. What would we say to our tour guide? We'd say there must be something lost in translation because I'm not understanding what you're saying. Or if we understood what he said, or if he was speaking in English, we would say that doesn't make any sense. Why? Because something can't come from nothing. Does everyone understand this? No. What comes from nothing? Nothing comes from nothing. Can something come from nothing? No. We all logically understand this. So we all intuitively understand this. If you're walking and then you see in the masjid that there's just this watch on the floor, then what will you do? Everybody's first instinct will be that they'll go to the office or something, they'll go to the imam and they'll say, I found this watch on the floor, maybe somebody lost it. What if the imam says that, oh, no, sometimes watches just appear randomly. It just came out of the floor, sometimes it happens. Then what would we say? We'd say that doesn't make any sense. Because what do we all intuitively understand? Just from, no one needed to teach us that, but what do we naturally just understand? Watches belong to somebody. For this to be there, somebody must have put it there. Somebody must have dropped it there. Things don't come from nothing. Somebody must have made this. We all understand that. Okay, now this is what goes back to intuitive truths. We have two things that are observed. If we observe that, the distance between the earth and the sun is such and such thing, that's something that's observed. That's something that's empirical. But if what about the idea that something can't come from nothing? Is that something necessarily that we observe? Well, kind of, but that's not really the point. The point is that that's not something that we learn from observation, but rather that's something that we just know. That's an intuitive truth. So again, we have two bases for our knowledge at this point, things that are observed and things that are intuitive truths. So now if we're talking about it in terms of the existence of Allah Ta'ala, if we say that, subhanAllah, look at the mountains, somebody must have look at the mountains, look at how complex they are. Look at the complexity of the human body. Look at the complexity within one single cell of the human body. You have all these cells that are working in conjunction, trillions of cells, without anyone to manage them. This is amazing, right? So that's an argument from, is that intuitive or is that from observation? That's from observation, right? That's something that we observe, that's something that we learn, right? Does a maybe, I don't know, a small little toddler know that? About the complexity of the human body? No. Okay, that's something that we observe. So that would be an argument for the existence of a creator from observation. And then if we just say, well, nothing comes from nothing. You can't have something that comes from nothing. So this even a child would probably be able to understand. So the world, could it have come from nothing? Just like we understand that the watch couldn't have just popped out of thin air. This watch could not just have appeared. Similarly, could the world have just appeared? Could the universe have just appeared without somebody putting it there, without somebody causing it? No. So that would be an argument from just in our intuitive nature. Do we understand? So our arguments can be either from, or our deductions, we can say, can either be from mushahadat, things that we observe, or they can be from things that we just know intuitively. Does everyone understand this? Okay. So now with that basis, we have things that we observe and things that are intuitive. From that, we can have a logically flowing argument. We start with those as our building blocks. And then from there, we move forward. Right? Does everyone understand? Good. So now what we do is we produce a logically flowing argument that will argue for the existence of a creator. So what we can see is the last thing that's on the page over here. Whatever began to exist has a cause. Do we all understand that? Now the universe is also a thing. The universe also began to exist. Do we know this? Yes, we know this, both from observation, also from intuition. So from both things we know that, and we will discuss that shortly. The universe began to exist. So now everyone try to follow. Whatever began to exist has a cause. So just like this watch, it didn't always exist, it began to exist. So that means somebody must have made this watch, right? It has a cause. The universe also began to exist. So what is the conclusion then? The universe must also have a cause. The universe must also have a creator. Does everyone understand? Okay, so this is how we can use what we're discussing right now to come to a conclusion, or to come up with some sort of argument about the existence of Allah Ta'ala. Okay, does everyone understand this? Okay, good. So if this is enough for you, if this is sufficient, you're convinced, then you're welcome to go. But there's still a little bit more that we're going to discuss. Okay, I wasn't serious. Okay, anyway, so now we're going to talk about self-evident truths. Right, we talked about that a little bit before. Self-evident truth is universal, untaught, natural, intuitive. We talked about that. Now, atheists, what I have at the top, as you can see, is atheism and reason. What atheists do, atheists, for those of us who might not know, atheists are people who don't believe in a God. They believe that there's no God. Okay, so what they do is actually something that's unreasonable. What atheists do is actually something irrational. Why do atheists, okay, let's go back to this. Do atheists accept observation? Do atheists accept empirical data? Do they? Yeah, that's all they accept. But do they accept things that are intuitive truths, things that are intuitively known? No. So you say that everything has a cause. What would they say? Well, why is that true? Why do things need to have a cause? Why can't something come from nothing? Okay, do we understand? So what is the atheist doing over there? Has anybody heard somebody say something like that before? Probably all of us have heard this at some point or another. An atheist will say, well, why can't something come from nothing? We say nothing comes from nothing. It can't be that something comes from nothing. They'll say, why? So what they're doing is they're denying intuitive truth. Okay? They might say, well, yeah, why can't something come from nothing? Why can't you have an infinite regress of causes? That we'll discuss a little bit further, inshallah. So they're denying things that are intuitively known. They're asking for proof for that. But let's go back to our starting point. When you have an intuitive truth, does it require proof? So what would be a more rational position? To try to prove that the past existed, or for somebody who claims that the past doesn't exist, for him to prove his position? Right? Because something that is intuitive, it's just known, it doesn't require any proof. Anything that's non-intuitive, something that's not naturally known, that's something that requires proof. So now these things like this, everything has a cause. Do you think this is an intuitive truth or something that's not known intuitively? Do you think a young child, without being taught anything, a toddler who hasn't yet gone to kindergarten, do you think that they will know that things don't come about from nothing? If you're taking your child, your young toddler, I don't know, you take him to, see the Sears Tower or something, the Willis Tower. And then the child says, wow, this is so big. How did this come? And you say, well, you see, it was designed by some architect in the 1970s or something like that. Then the child will say, okay. But then if you say, it just popped out of nowhere, what would the child say? Even a young toddler. You say, beta, it just popped out of nowhere, because sometimes things can come from nothing. The child will look confused. Why? Because this is not a natural conclusion. Do we understand? So something that is self-evident does not require any proof. Do we all understand that? What the atheist will do is something very irrational. The atheist will deny something that is self-evident. And the atheist will ask for proof for that. But now let's ask, what is a more rational position? To assume this by default, that things have causes, nothing comes from nothing, you can't have something from nothing, or to deny that and try to seek proof for that. It doesn't make sense. Now, which approach is more rational? Which one should be made the default? So if we say that the universe came about from nothing, you have this extremely complex universe that is extremely complex, extremely fine-tuned, and it just popped out of nowhere. There's no one that caused it. It just came. Or what some atheists even now go to say is they realize the complexity in the universe. And they say, wow, this is so complex, it's very difficult to say that this came about by chance. And this we'll discuss a little bit further, inshallah. So they say there must have been maybe some super intellect that created it. Maybe there was some alien that created it, that had it was a very complex, advanced society, these aliens, and maybe they created it. So that's what some atheists will say. So now, instead of saying that, or they say maybe it was just a string of this universe, then there was another universe before that, there's another universe before that, and then maybe there's this, or maybe there's something called the multiverse. This is just one part of many different universes. So you can go about all these mental gymnastics. Or you can just say that, or you can say the universe came from nothing. You can say that there's maybe some advanced alien society that created it. You can say maybe it's part of a multiverse. You can do all those things. Or you can just say, well, the easiest conclusion is just that there is a creator that created it. What do you think is more rational? To say that there is a creator that created it. Do we all understand? So now what approach should be made the default? To say that there is an uncreated creator who created the universe, we can just say that's the default. Okay? So now let's talk about which one do we think is self-evident. Okay? This is not necessarily a systematic proof for a creator right now, but let's just reason through it a little bit. Which one do you think is more appealing, or which one do you think is more intuitive? We can say, a child asks, well, where did the universe come from? We say, well, Allah created everything. That's what we tell our children, and then what do they say? They say, oh, okay, subhanAllah, that's very good. But if we say that it came about from nothing, which one do you think is more rational? If we tell our child that it just popped out of nothing, which one is more rational? To say that it came from a creator. Now, which one do you think is more self-evident? Which one do you think is more intuitive? To say that it came from a creator. So what approach do you think should be made the default? To me, and to many others, it makes much more sense to make the approach of saying that Allah Ta'ala, or to say a God, you don't even have to say that at this point, that there is a creator who created the universe, that seems to be much more intuitive. Otherwise, you're going to have to go through all these mental gymnastics. Which one do you think is more universal? Across different cultures, across different times, don't you think that people believed in a God? Yeah, maybe not the same God, maybe many gods, but this belief that there must have been some higher power that created the world. Don't you think that's universal? Yeah. Do you think that's something that's untaught? Do you think if there's somebody who's isolated on an island, who doesn't have any other human contact, do you think he or she would be able to look around and conclude that there must have been something that created this? Yes. Right? Is it intuitive? Is it the easiest explanation? Yes. Is it natural? Yes, it's also natural as well. But do you think a person on a desert island would be able to say that, oh wow, look at all this, it must have popped out of nowhere. Probably not, right? So which one do you think should be made the default? The approach that you must prove that there's a creator, or the approach that you must prove, if you believe that there's no creator, you must prove that? Which one do you think should be made our default? That there's no creator? Yeah, so we can start with the default. This isn't obviously an argument that'll satisfy an atheist, but I'm speaking about for our own selves. If we start with the approach that there is a creator, and if you believe anything to the contrary, you believe that there's no creator, then the onus of proof is on you, rather than switching it around. That just seems to be much more rational. That seems to make much more sense. There's an author named Frank Turek who said that he wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Why? Because atheism itself is, we can even describe it as a belief. It's a belief that the universe came about from nothing. Or it's a belief that there is no God. It's a belief in no gods. So just like we'd say that we believe that there is a God, that's also a belief as well. It's a belief that there's no God. Do we understand? So atheism is also a belief. Now it requires you to make these quantum leaps, that maybe something came from nothing. So this author, Frank Turek, he wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Because to be an atheist, it requires this enormous leap, this intellectual leap. Do we all understand? Okay. Now getting into the actual discussion now, I think we go until 2:45, if I'm not mistaken, 2:45 or 2:50. So we'll go for another 20 minutes and then we will stop after that. Okay. Now let's go through the argument for the existence of a God. So now this argument, what we discussed before was just some stuff from reason. Now what we'll talk about right now is an argument of the existence of God from the Quran. Okay, as I said, the Quran doesn't discuss it a lot, but there's maybe one or two places where the Quran just touches on it a little bit, so we'll discuss that. Okay, so the Quran says in Surah Tur, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أم خلقوا من غير شيء أم هم الخالقون أم خلقوا السماوات والأرض بل لا يوقنون. That were they created from nothing? Okay, were they created from nothing? أم هم الخالقون, or were they the creators? Meaning, did they create themselves? So those are two possibilities. And then Allah Ta'ala says, أم خلقوا السماوات والأرض, or did they create the heavens and the earth? Rather, بل لا يوقنون, they don't have any certainty, they're not certain. Okay, so this is one place in the Quran where Allah Ta'ala addresses the whole idea of the existence of Allah Ta'ala. Were they created from nothing? So if we think about it a little bit and we want to break it down, there's actually four possibilities that logically arise from this that are suggested by these ayat. Do we all understand how many possibilities? Four. Okay. Okay. Number one, were they created from nothing? أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ. So the first possibility, as you can see over here, is that they were perhaps created by nothing. That's one logical possibility. Is that true? No, we'll discuss why, but that's a logical possibility. Maybe they're created from nothing. Okay. Number two, or were they the creators of themselves? Meaning that were we self-created? We understand that's the second possibility. Either we are created from nothing, that's one possibility. I'm not saying these are right. Right now I'm just saying that these are logical possibilities. Or we could have created ourselves, that's also a logical possibility. That's number two. Number three. Okay, sorry, the color scheme does not really work so well on this background. Did they create the heavens and the earth? So the third possibility is that perhaps they were created by something else that was created. So we could have been created by something else that was created. So either we're created from nothing, that's number one, or we created ourselves, that's number two, or we're created by something else that was created. That's number three. Okay, do we all understand? Is there a fourth possibility, logically speaking? What is the fourth possibility? That Allah created us, or that, obviously. We're created by Allah Ta'ala, we're created by something that's uncreated. Right now, at this point, we don't even need to say that that's Allah Ta'ala. That we can prove afterwards. Right now, let's just keep it general, so that anybody, a Christian, a Jew, anybody can agree with this. Number four, they're created by something that's uncreated. And we would say that is Allah Ta'ala. Do we all understand? So these are the four logical possibilities. Can you think of anything else? There's not really, the only other thing you could say is that maybe we weren't created, but obviously observation would reject that. Because can we observe that we're created? Can we observe that we exist? We observe that we exist. So obviously we know that we exist. So logically speaking, there's only 4 possibilities. We can't really think of anything else. Okay? So number 1, created by nothing. Number 2, self-created. Number 3, created by something uncreated. Number 3, created by something else that was created. And number 4, created by something uncreated. Do we all understand this? Good. Okay. Yeah, these are the 4 possibilities again. Okay, so now let's go through it a little bit. Yeah, that's the right one. Okay, now let's talk about the first one. Created by nothing. Do you think that this is a logical, this is a pretty reasonable conclusion? No. Because as we can see over here, nothing is an absence of things. If we assert that nothing comes from nothing, it means that things can come into being from no potential matter. That doesn't make sense. Intuitively, we know this to be incorrect. That if you say, oh wow, this is a very nice old-looking laptop, where did you get this? And I say, I got it from Best Buy. That you would understand. If I say, no, it just popped out of my desk one day, then everyone understands that that doesn't make sense. So intuitively, we all understand that nothing comes from nothing. Can you have something that comes from nothing? Nope, you don't have something that comes from nothing. So do you think this is a logical, this is a good possibility? That maybe we're created by nothing, maybe it happened. Nope, that's not a good possibility. So let's X this out. Okay, we'll cross this one out. Number 1, nope, that one's not right. Okay, could the universe have been created from nothing? So if this laptop could not have come from nothing, if this book could not have come from nothing, I don't tell you I ordered from Amazon, I say that it just appeared. You understand that that's not correct. So do you think something as complex as the world could have come from nothing? Nope. Do you think something even more complex, the universe, could have come from nothing? I doubt it, right? Probably not. So nothing comes from nothing. So first possibility, let's X that out. The answer is no. Okay, universal principle, from nothing, nothing comes. 0 plus 0 plus 0 equals 0. Does 0 plus 0 ever equal 2 or 3 or 1? No. Okay. Now the second possibility. So we already crossed out the first possibility. Maybe we're created by nothing. Maybe not. No, that's not right. The second possibility, maybe we created ourselves. Maybe that's what happened. But why do you think that this would be incorrect? Why is it not possible for us to create ourselves? You can't do it again? We don't remember? Okay, anything else? There you go. In order to create yourself, you would have already had to have existed, but you couldn't have existed yet because you haven't yet been created. So what would it lead to? It's just a logical contradiction. This would necessitate that at one time you both exist and you don't exist at the same time. Why? Because in order for you to create yourself, you need to exist. In order for you to, require to be created, then you need to not exist. So this would require for you to exist and not exist at the same time. Now, does this make sense? This doesn't make sense, right? So self-created, the second logical possibility. Do you think this makes sense? It doesn't make sense. Okay, we're talking about that one, self-creation. We understand that the concept of creation leads to us to conclude that self-creation is impossible. The term created refers to something that emerged. If it emerged, that implies that it was once not in existence. To say that something created itself is like saying that it was in existence and non-existence at the same time. That's what we just discussed. It's like giving birth to yourself, right? If somebody says, oh, mashallah, this is such a well-behaved child, who are the parents? You say, no, he's his own parent. Then you would say, oh, what? That doesn't make sense. Because we know that a child can't be his own parent. A child requires somebody else to be his parents, right? So do you think something can create itself? No. So our second possibility, that perhaps we are self-created. أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Maybe they created themselves. Maybe they're the creators. No, that doesn't make sense either. So the first possibility, maybe we're created from nothing. Nope, that's not right. Second possibility, maybe we're created from something else. Maybe we created ourselves. That's not right either. That doesn't make sense. That leads to a logical contradiction. It's not logically conceivable. Okay, now the third the third possibility now. If we recall, let's just go back. The third possibility is that maybe we are created by something else that was created. أَمْ خَلَقُوا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. So what we derive from that is maybe we are created by something else that was created. Is that a possibility? Sure, let's entertain it for a moment. Maybe we are created by something else that was created. But there's a problem in that. What is the problem? The problem is this would lead to something called infinite regress. Infinite regress of causes. Okay, why? Because the question that automatically arises now, if I say, well, you have something, and then that thing was created by something else, then what would something else that was created? Then what would be the natural question that arises in your minds? Who created that thing? Say, oh, don't worry about it. There's another thing that created that. And then you say, oh, wait, what about that thing? You're like, oh, I didn't think about that. Oh, yeah, there was something else that created that. Then what do you think it would lead to? It just what's called an infinite regress. It just goes and goes and goes. There's no stop to it. Okay? And can an infinite regress can ever explain anything? It can't ever explain anything. We'll talk about that a little bit. Okay, so we say that something A was created by B, and then B was created by C. There's no end to it. You might say, well, the English alphabet only has 26 letters. Just use it as an example. We'll use other notation after the Z. Okay, so this question can carry on forever. Okay, it leads to what's called an infinite regress of causes. Now, this is something that we'd say doesn't explain anything. Why? Because just logically, if we're to understand it right now, if I say that this universe was created by another universe, and that was created by another universe, and that was created by another universe, do you think that explains anything? Does that ever answer the question? Because your question would always be, well, what created that first universe? You say, well, there wasn't any first universe because there was always another universe before that. Now, that wouldn't explain anything. Just as confused as you were in the beginning, you would be just as confused, if not more confused, because it wouldn't solve anything. And now let's look at it from a different angle. If you have an infinite series like that, then it'll never, an actual infinity. We're not talking about a theoretical infinity. So we have two things. There's a Greek philosopher named Zeno. There's something that he introduced called Zeno's paradox, in which he said that it's impossible for somebody to move. For me to go from here to the doors over there, that's not possible. Why? Because for me to go from here to there, I would have to at least traverse half of that distance. Where is half that distance? Maybe like the middle of the masjid. And that has half of a distance as well, which is, half of that, like maybe a few safs. That has a half distance as well. And we can keep on dividing the distance from here to the masjid in half ad infinitum. We can keep on dividing it just indefinitely. And then that would lead to infinite divisions. And is it possible for a person to traverse infinity? You can't traverse infinity, so that means motion is impossible. It's impossible for me to go from here to there. Now we hear that, we say, okay, well, that sounds convincing a little bit, but that sounds confusing because I just walked into the masjid. I will walk out afterwards. We know that motion is possible. So what was the folly in Zeno's argument when he said that you can't traverse from any one place to another because you'd have to go on infinite smaller intervals of distance? Why? Because I can divide from here to here, I can divide that in half. This is one interval. I can divide that in half into half of that, which is another interval. I can divide that in half into half of that, which is another interval. I can keep on dividing in half. So how many little intervals will I have? Infinite. And it's impossible for anybody to traverse in infinity, so that means motion is impossible. We say, well, that's very confusing because I know that motion is possible. So what is the folly in Zeno's argument? They're halves of a whole, exactly. So what Zeno is talking about is not an actual infinity. What he's talking about is starting out with something finite and working down from there. So I say the distance from this table up to here. That is, I don't know, a set distance. Maybe it's about a foot or something. Can I divide that in half? Yeah. Can I divide that in half? Yeah, I can keep on going. But at the end of the day, these are halves of a whole. I'm starting out with something finite to begin with. Somebody who studied calculus, you know there's two types of infinite series. Series that converge and series that diverge, right? So this would be an example of like a series that converges. If anybody knows calculus, you might know what I'm talking about. It leads up to a finite number, right? So that's not an actual infinity. Rather, these are parts of a whole. Do you understand that? So we can say at some level it's infinity, it's more of like a theoretical infinity. That's not an actual infinity. But in terms of an actual infinity, that doesn't exist in the universe. Okay, let me say that again. An actual infinity does not exist in the universe. Why? Because in the universe, do we have infinite matter? Do we have infinite time? Do we have infinite space? We don't have infinite anything, so then how can we have an actual infinity? It doesn't make sense. Okay? Now, so in infinite regress of causes, for something, I know this is getting a little bit heavy, so we'll end soon, don't worry. There's more to the discussion, but we'll just conclude tomorrow, inshallah. An infinite regress of causes does not explain anything. Because if something, you project it back infinitely, then you'll never get to the starting point. You'll never be able to get to the starting point. Why? We'll discuss that we'll discuss that very shortly. But now we say that that universe, there wasn't any first universe, but then whatever, if we just go infinitely back, there was some universe there and it created something else. That itself was created by something else. If you can just project backwards after that. That was created by something else, that was created by something else, and then you just progress infinitely forward. And then we say that our universe is basically, after an infinitude of other universes. Do you think we'd ever get to our universe over here? We'd never get to our universe. Because is it possible to traverse an actual infinity? Not a theoretical infinity, not parts of a whole, but an actual infinity. Can you ever traverse that? You can never traverse that. Okay, so now let's go through a simple example. But we see that, okay, before we get to that, the universe does exist. Do we know that the universe existed? Can we observe that? Yeah, we can observe that. So what does that tell us? The fact that the universe exists tells us that there couldn't have been an infinite regress of causes. There couldn't have been an infinite number of universes before. Why? Because if there was that, then we would never get to our current universe today. Why? Because we can't traverse infinite universes. We never get to today. Okay, so let's go through a simple example. Okay, no, not this one. We'll discuss this one afterwards. I'm just skipping some slides. Okay, so as we can see over here, we have a little private over here. Somebody that's a soldier in the army. Okay, now he needs to shoot. Okay, just a target, not a person, because we don't promote violence. So so he just needs to shoot a target. But he can't shoot until he gets the green light from his superior. Okay, so this is our private, and then he needs to get the green light from his superior. So you have his superior over here, a lieutenant. Okay, and his superior, the lieutenant, cannot give him the green light until he gets the green light from his superior, which is the Secretary of Defense. Okay, and then he can't give him the green light. He has to wait for his superior to tell him. Who is his superior? I didn't put it over there. The President of the United States. Okay? Yeah, so I didn't put it there for obvious reasons. Yeah, so anyway, so then he needs to wait for the order from his superior. And then he needs to wait for the order from his superior. And he needs to wait for the order from his superior. And then let's just say, we'll just postulate it back, and we'll say that everybody needs to wait for the order to shoot, or the green light, from the guy before him. And you have this infinite line of people. Okay? So then you have an infinite line of people. The person at the end, he can't shoot until that guy tells him. And that guy can't shoot until that guy tells him. That guy can't tell him until the guy before him tells him. It just goes back infinitely. Do we all understand? Okay, it goes back infinitely. Do you think that our private over here will ever end up shooting the target? He'll never shoot. Because it just goes back infinitely. So do you think that the command will ever get from that, whatever that negative infinity is, all the way over there? You can't traverse infinity, so it'll never get there. Do we all understand this? Yes. So what does this mean? This means that if our universe was created by something else that was created, and that was created by something else that was created, basically you just go back infinitely, then do you think that we will ever get to our universe today? We will never get to our universe today, because you can't traverse an actual infinitude. Do we understand this? Yeah. So then, and then he needs to wait for his superior, he needs to wait for his superior. The result is that it just keeps on going, goes on infinitely. And do you think that our private over here will ever shoot? He'll never shoot, right? So an infinite regress of causes, this infinite regress, do you think it will ever lead to anything? It'll never lead to anything. Do we all understand this? Okay, very good. Now we'll say that we have our private, and then will he ever shoot the gun? Well, no, because there's an infinite regress of causes. You can't traverse an infinite thing, so he'll never end up shooting. But let's say that this guy gives the order to, the Secretary of Defense gives the order, he says affirmative, to this guy, the lieutenant, and he gives the order to this guy. Then what will happen? He'll shoot, okay? Again, just a target. He'll shoot the target. Okay, when we assume that he shoots, when? When he's given an order, but there has to be a stop to it, right? If it goes infinitely back, will he ever shoot? No. So if we extrapolate that to our situation today, if there's an infinite number of universes, will this universe ever come into existence? No, there has to be a stop to it somewhere, okay? So now we can say, oh, well, okay, maybe this universe was created by something else that was created. Maybe that was created by something else that was created. Maybe there were 40 things before, 40 other universes before. But it has, maybe there were 100 other universes before. But it has to stop somewhere. At the end of the day, whether you say there are 40 universes before, or 100, or 1,000, or 1,000,000, at some point it must stop. Do we understand that? Why? Because an infinite regress of causes will never lead to anything. So it must stop at some point. So what do you think is the most logical explanation? To say that it stops at the 1,000th universe back, or to say that there was just an uncreated creator who just created this universe? What is the more logical conclusion? To say that there was just an uncreated creator who just created the universe. Do we understand? Right? There's a concept called Occam's razor, which you opt for the easiest explanation. The explanation doesn't require any additional argument. Okay, so that is the simplest explanation. So our universe was created by an uncreated creator. Okay, so now in order for him to shoot, the chain of command must stop somewhere. So which implies there must be a beginning. If you say that the beginning was the 1,000th universe back, the onus of proof is on you, because you're making an additional claim. So that additional claim requires additional evidence. Do we understand that? Right? But we can just say, go for the simplest explanation. That the universe didn't come from nothing, it must have come from something. That something, was it something else that was created? Well, that would require to be created itself. That would require to be created, that thing must be created too. It would have to go back. If it doesn't go back infinitely, it must stop somewhere. You can either say that that thing, the initial thing, was the initial creator. You can say that, but at some point you have to say that there must have been an initial creator. Do we all understand that? Right? There must be a beginning. We can say the creator was the 1,000th one back. Or you can say that it's just Allah Ta'ala who created the universe. What is a more simple explanation? Say that Allah Ta'ala is the one that created the universe. Do we understand that? Okay. Is there such thing as infinity? Okay. So, okay, we have 3 more minutes. Let's just basically, we'll quickly conclude this. So what were our 4 arguments? We'll just go back really quickly. Our 4 arguments were, not arguments, the 4 possibilities. Sorry, this is taking a long time. Okay, sorry. No, not that either. Okay, so the first possibility was that either the universe was created by nothing. Remember we said there's only 4 logical possibilities. We can't think of anything else any other logical possibility. This first one, is that a good option? Nope, we'll cross this first one out. That's not a good option. Could the universe have come from nothing? Nope, it couldn't come from nothing. Could the universe be self-created? Do you think that's a good option? Nope, we don't think that's a good option either. Let's cross that one off too. Could the universe have been created by something else that was created? Do you think that's a good option? That doesn't seem like a good option too, because why? Who can tell me why that's not a logical option? Who created that thing? It would lead to infinite regress. So that's not a good option either. Now, what is the only conclusion that's left? The universe was created by something else, but by something that was uncreated. Do we understand? And we'd say that the uncreated being is Allah Ta'ala. Do we all understand that? So this is a logical argument from the Quran. And even if you say, don't tell somebody that's from the Quran. Even if you just say that's from logic, it makes sense too because it's very logical. So from this we can understand that there's only one option. The universe must have a creator. Okay, so we'll just very quickly conclude. I think actually I have until 2:50, but I will stop before that, inshallah. Okay, so let's just... Okay. Is there such a thing as infinity, like an actual infinity, in our universe? No. In mathematics, does the concept exist? Sure, definitely. I majored in math in college. We deal with infinity all the time. But that's not, it doesn't actually, there's no observable infinity in the universe. If you think there's one, then tell me about it. I'd like to hear. Okay, so now let's just understand a little bit about infinity. If anybody wants to know more about infinity, you can look at the works of the mathematician David Hilbert. He proposed something called an infinite hotel. He said that, actually, you know what? Let's just go through the simple example before we get into Hilbert's example. Okay, if you have an infinite amount of pens, so we have our dear friend Faraz over here. He has one pen that you see over here, but actually in his pockets and the trunk of his car, he has infinite pens. Okay? And let's say he lets me borrow one of his pens. Now, how many pens does he have? He still has infinity. Okay, and what if I give him, oh, I don't have one. Okay, well, let's say I give him a pen. Thanks. Okay, I give him a pen. Now, how many pens does he have? Does he have any more pens? He doesn't have any more pens. He still has infinite pens. And if I take a pen from him, then does he have less pens? Does he have fewer pens? Doesn't have fewer pens. How many pens does he still have? Infinite. So we can see that naturally this is not something that really makes sense to us. Okay? Theoretically, can you theorize it? Can you make postulates about it? Yeah, sure, in the realm of mathematics. But in terms of the actual observed universe, the world around us, does it exist? No. So as you can see over here, subtract 2 from an infinite amount of pens. How many pens are left? Infinity, right? Okay. So let's say that you have a bunch of cubes. Okay, has anybody here ever played Jenga? Yeah, okay. So let's say that you have an infinite amount of blocks. Okay? And then we're playing Jenga, and we have this tower that's infinitely high. Okay? Now somebody is about to take one out, and we say, no, this is infinitely high. So anywhere you take it out from, the whole thing will fall down because there's so many things on top of it. There's an infinite amount of blocks on top of it. So don't take it out from anywhere in the middle, just only take it out from the top. So when we're playing this infinite Jenga, that's what I tell Faraz over here. Don't take a block from anywhere in the middle, because then it'll lead to infinite amount of, even though it's in the middle, you have this big infinite stack. So this block at the bottom, how many blocks are on top of it? Infinity, right? But what about this block in the middle? How many blocks are on top of that? Infinity, right? So I say don't take out a block from anywhere in the middle or anywhere at the bottom, and don't do that, because you have infinite blocks on top of it, the whole thing will fall down. If anybody has played Jenga, do you ever take out a block from the bottom? Do you think that's a good idea? No, because what will happen? The whole tower will topple. So I say, no, only take it out from the top. Okay, I tell him that. Now, what will he do? Will he say, okay, I'll just take it out from the top? What will be the problem with that? He'll never be able to find the top. Why? Because is there any top to an infinite stack of blocks? There's no top to it. So yeah, so anyway, so this is this is not really the way you play Jenga, this is a pyramid, but that was just an example. There's no top block if it's infinitely stacked. Why? Because there's always infinite things on top of it. Do we understand? Yeah. Okay, so then the idea is that an actual infinitude of things does not exist in reality. You can have parts of a whole, maybe, but then an actual infinitude in the universe does not exist. So can you have an infinite regress of causes? No, that doesn't make sense, right? Okay. So with that said, we'll stop over here. We have, alhamdulillah, still 2 minutes to go, but we'll stop over here. There's a few more things that we need to discuss, but we'll carry on with this discussion tomorrow, inshallah. Then after that, we'll go on to some of the other topics I discussed, like some of the defining aspects of Sunni theology, what is Shia theology. We'll discuss about the development of Aqidah. We'll discuss about the concept of a bid'ah. We'll discuss about the legal authority of hadith, and a bunch of things like that, inshallah. Inshallah, we ask that Allah Ta'ala give all of us very firm understanding. We ask that Allah Ta'ala protect our iman from any doubts. We ask that Allah Ta'ala protect our iman and the iman of all of our friends and family members. رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا بَعْدَ إِذْ هَدَيْتَنَا وَهَبْ لَنَا مِن لَّدُنكَ رَحْمَةً إِنَّكَ أَنتَ الْوَهَّابُ. So we'll have a few-minute break, and after that, our session with Mawlana Uthman, the fiqh of halal and haram, will start shortly, inshallah. So you can just take a short few-minute break to just stretch your legs, and then, or rest your mind if that was very heavy. And then we'll start in a few minutes, inshallah, with Mawlana Uthman. Jazakullahu Khairun.
So yes, everyone is encouraged to stretch, visit the bookstall. Those brothers in Itikaf, one brother donated these dua book cards that we use every morning. So you can go to the bookstall to pick up your copy of the dua bookmarks. And inshallah at 3 o'clock, we're going to start the next session, Fiqh of Halal and Haram with Maulana Usman. Inshallah, it's going to be a much lighter session, and it won't be an hour, so it'll be a little bit less than an hour, about 45 minutes. So please do come back, and then everyone can take rest after that session.